Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of Seen on Screen. With me still is Professor James Morrison from Claremont Mckenna, and he's here to talk with me a little bit about the course that he's offering next fall, entitled Hitchcock. Unfortunately, I won't be around as I'm graduating to take it, but you can if you're not. So why don't you tell me a little bit about this course and how actually it and relates pretty well, as we were talking about, to Psycho, one of his most famous films, as a precursor to the torture porn genre that is becoming ever so popular today. So why don't you give me the rundown of the class?
Sure. Well, I actually had wanted to call the class Hitchcock and Contemporary Cinema, because we're not only looking at Hitchcock's films, we're looking at some of the films that he's influenced, including movies like Rosemary's Baby by Roman Polanski, some of Brian De Palma's films like Dressed to Kill, the French New Wave, which was very much influenced by Hitchcock, and so forth. But the registrar, since it was already called Special Topics in Film Hitchcock, said that that was too many words, so it's not Hitchcock in Contemporary Film on the registrar's site, it's just Hitchcock. But I wanted to give people a sense that there would actually be a broader take. And Psycho, of course, is a turning point in cinema. It comes at a time when the production code was still in place, of a very restrictive code of censorship that was observed from 1934 until 1968, when it was replaced by the rating system. And Psycho really pushed the envelope in terms of what could be shown, because of course its most famous scene is a brutal murder that takes place in a shower, and he had to fight to get the sequence through, so there's a lot of interesting stuff that we'll look into about the role of the production code and how Hitchcock was one of many people to be challenging it in the late 50s and early 60s. It's of course also the point of origin of the slasher movie of the 70s and 80s, a big influence on Wes Craven's early movies of the early 70s, like Last House on the Left, for instance. And regrettably, a pretty big influence on the torture porn industry in its way. In fact, it's probably one of the things that, to the extent that the people who make those movies are in any way interested in legitimating them, helps to legitimate them. Because of course, Psycho, although Hitchcock at the time, even at the time of making it, was regarded essentially as simply the master of suspense and the popular entertainer and so on, his reputation was being clearly rehabilitated all during the 1960s, and he came to be regarded more and more as a serious artist. And Psycho was actually one of the films that achieved that in a way for him. So that's another thing we'll look at in the course, that whole process by which a film director moves from simply being seen as a sort of popular entertainer to being seen increasingly as an artist. How does that happen? What does it mean?
I feel like usually it's the other way around.
How so?
Well, I feel like Steven Spielberg, for example, sort of had the auteur, artistic films earlier in his career, and as his sort of persona sort of eclipsed the artistic, films that he was bringing to the world, or the techniques that he was bringing. I think that he sort of lost a certain sense of credibility almost, and maybe Alfred Hitchcock achieved. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, the television show, came before films like Vertigo and North by Northwest, I believe. So it's sort of like a reverse.
Well, he was doing the television show from about 1955 to 1962, so it was during the period that he made Vertigo. But what's certainly interesting there is that when he made Psycho, he used, instead of his usual film crew, his television crew. And he did that because he wanted the film to have an essentially cheap B-movie look, which it does, because for one thing it's in black and white, and he'd moved mostly into color at that point, which was associated with a kind of bigger budget sensibility and so on. So Psycho was an effort actually to simulate a kind of emerging cycle of exploitation films of that era. And it's very odd that the film that he made to sort of imitate that group of films, like movies like, the Roger Corman movies, like Little Shop of Horrors even, the first version in 1960, that film that was so clearly bidding for a kind of exploitation movie look and feel was also one of the ones that served as a kind of breakthrough for him. As for Spielberg, you know, his bids for serious artistry were Empire of the Sun, 1983 or 4, and Schindler's List, of course, in 93, and then AI, because of its association with Stanley Kubrick, who was, of course, a kind of serious artist figure.
That movie rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less interested in how the films themselves work in that regard than in how the ways they're talked about do. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing Hitchcock began to do at a certain point, because he was always revered in France, mm-hmm. you know, the home of the auteur theory. He started in the early 60s sending French reviews of his movies around to American critics. Mm-hmm. And he did this because he wanted them to know that the French regarded him as a great artist. And unfortunately it backfired, because the critics started talking about how pretentious he was in their reviews. And it could be said to put an end to his career, because his reviews for the movie Marnie in 1964 were sort of career-ending, terrible reviews that mm-hmm. referred to him as being senile and so on and so forth.
The death rattle.
Yeah.
Well, I would say I'm looking forward to this class, but I won't be here for it, unfortunately.
Well,
but I'm glad that you could take the time to stop by and talk to me about it, and you'll be able to sign up for this class. I think registration is pretty soon, so you better hurry.
Started today.
Started today. All right. I'm going to get this episode out extra fast then. So thanks for stopping by today. As Professor James Morrison at Claremont Mckenna, Professor of Film Studies, took time out of his schedule to sit down with me. And I don't know, in case this is the last show, I don't know, this is not going to be the last show. We're going to do another one, so I won't let this be the last one. I won't say my goodbyes yet then. So we'll see you next week then on Seen on Screen.